Scott Mitchell back with us as we are going to be talking about why he believes aliens are actually fallen angels posing as aliens. What's going on there? We'll check in with Scott in a moment on Coast to Coast AM. A little bit about Scott Mitchell, a mind-opening Bible teacher, host of Bible Mysteries podcast. Scott has been a student of the Bible, Bible history, and biblical mysteries for 40-plus years. His careers have spanned music, legal support, and technology. Scott has pastored a Bible church in Texas, is the founder of the Unlock the Bible Now ministry, and after years of study, Scott found the key to unlocking the secrets in the Bible. Scott began Bible Mysteries podcast, and his utbnow.com website shares the truth about what the world is trying to hide. Scott, welcome back.
It's great to be back, George. Good to hear you.
I'm looking forward to this, and how have you been?
I've been quite well. Last time you and I spoke, I had an attack happening in a hotel room as I was traveling, and this time I made sure to pray and armor up so the same attack won't happen again.
Was it a demonic attack on you?
I do believe so. You and I had spoken several times in the past, and I never had my throat just close up as if somebody grabbed it and closed it up, and I was struggling to even speak.
They did not want you to tell us whatever you were telling us that night.
I firmly believe that, and how silly of me not to think about making sure the armor of God was surrounding me. I just didn't think about it, and sure enough, that came through.
Scott, before we get into the UFO alien tie-in here, give us your description of fallen angels and what they are.
Yeah, so I believe that the Bible indicates the angels were created by God in the beginning, and evidently 1/3 of them joined one particular cherub in an insurrection against God. This particular cherub is named Lucifer. He wanted to be God, and he drew 1/3 of the angels into this rebellion. There was a war, and it practically devastated our solar system. I believe the evidence is all around us. It's possible that the asteroid belt that we see today was a planet called Rahab in the Bible, and the devastation that came from that rained down on Mars and the moon and the Earth. And but at one point, the Earth was their home; it was His dominion, and then God restored that planet, granted dominion of the earth to man, whom He created much more recently than the angels. And the angels have been angry, and they've wanted it back ever since.
What made them go astray in the first place?
Pride. This entity named Lucifer was a cherub that was created, the most beautiful created being, full of the sum of wisdom, perfect in beauty. Every precious stone was his covering, according to Ezekiel 28, and that was not enough for him. He wanted more than just to be second fiddle to the Lord Himself. He wanted to receive worship, and he was able to convince these angels to join him in a rebellion, probably by promising them some form of power or dominion themselves if they won the insurrection, and hence we get the phrase, the love of money is the root of all evil.
Have they grown in terms of stature or population amongst themselves?
I don't believe they have, but it's interesting you bring that up, George, because the angels themselves don't procreate amongst each other. We know that they violated God's commandment in Genesis 6 when they came down and procreated with human women to create the giants of the Nephilim. So the Nephilim had increased their numbers at least up to the time when they were destroyed in the flood of Noah and became the disembodied spirits, or demons as people refer to them. But they'll be, I believe the alien abduction hybridization program is increasing their numbers now because the devil knows he's outnumbered 2-1 in this upcoming battle, and he's creating an army, in my opinion, of hybrid human aliens that are much more, they're the Supermen or the X-Men, of our fantasy movies, but they're going to be, they're literally going to war against the God of heaven when He returns.
And yes, tell us how, Scott, you tied the alien phenomenon in with the fallen angels then.
Well, it kind of starts with the passages in the Bible about the term the chariots of fire. In fact, that's episode 123 and 124. at BibleMysteriesPodcast.com if anybody wants to check it out. But these are vehicles of conveyance, and those centuries of the prophets like Elijah, to see something flying across the sky, there were no cars or airplanes for them to equate that to. So in the language of their century, they're calling it a chariot of fire because it's the closest vehicle of conveyance that they can compare it to. But in reality, I believe what they were seeing were what we would call UFOs. And this idea that angels, unfortunately, Christianity is deeply infected with heresies, including Gnosticism today and Christo-Platonism. And so we think of angels as these non-corporeal spirit beings, but they're not. They're very much physical and corporeal. When they have appeared in the Bible, they appear to look like men. They eat. They can be touched and handled, and these chariots of fire are drawn by horses of fire, according to the Bible in the Book of Kings and Samuel. So 2 Samuel. So we've got to change our thinking of this Western ideology from the Bible, when in fact it's an Oriental book, and we need to think of it as a Middle Eastern book, and with Eastern mentality. And the ancients and the rabbis of old, they didn't think of angels as ghostly apparitions. They knew that they were physical beings that could be touched and held.
Scott, are the aliens all fallen angels, or are some of them indeed from other planetary systems?
That's the great question, George, that there's debate about. I fall on the side of they're not aliens. They're extraterrestrial in every sense of the word, because they're not from this planet necessarily. But I think that the Greys, for example, that everybody talks about from, say, Roswell,
right,
they are probably host bodies for the disembodied spirits of the Nephilim. So that's where I come down on it. There's other opinions about that. But I believe they are probably carrying out an agenda. I don't think they want to be doing this. They would rather possess a human body if they could, and they're doing plenty of that too, particularly, in my opinion, in government. I believe politicians are mostly possessed. And that doesn't mean they're running around spinning their heads and spitting pea soup like the movies, They're following a carefully orchestrated agenda of domination and destruction of civilization because they want to bring about this government of the Antichrist.
Now, there's a program underfoot, of course, where we claim the abductions are done by extraterrestrials. You think there's another agenda here?
I really do, because if you think about the fact that in Genesis 6, when the sons of God saw the daughters of men that they were fair and took them wives of which they chose, I believe there was an exchange that took place. They made a contract with humanity because God gave man dominion of the earth. So there's some rules of engagement they have to play by. And when they came down, they said, hey, give us your wives, we will give you technology. And the exchange took place. Well, when the wives were taken by these entities, these were fallen angels, but the children that were produced by them and the women of earth were hybrids. So these became the giants of the Bible in the land of Canaan later on after that. But God destroyed the entire planet with a flood because of that. And, the story of Noah is not the story we learned as little kids, where, two of every kind of animal went in the ark because people were just not nice to each other. No, there was a genetic corruption and manipulation of God's creation of not just humans, but of the animal kingdom. So chimeras and things like that from lore and mythology are probably true. And therefore, God destroyed even the animal kingdom except for the ones that he saved on the ark. What he placed on the ark were the only genetically pure humans and animals that he originally created from their kind, and he saved those but destroyed the rest because they were not fully human. And I believe that these became the disembodied spirits, the dead Nephilim, the dead giants, and they are probably through their fathers, which are the fallen angels, the ones that remained unchained in hell because they weren't punished yet. They haven't done the same things that their brethren did. they're the ones that probably created or somehow manufactured host bodies for them. And that could somehow be an indication of what the Greys potentially are.
Were they, Scott, abominations? I think they were, weren't they?
Absolutely, absolutely. And in fact, that's a great term for it, because we don't get this story from the Bible, but there's a book called the Book of Enoch, which is considered a non-canonical book, but it's historically significant. And it's the only book that tells of this story about the Nephilim in the details that we get from that. And I give it relevance only because it's actually cited in the Bible, in the book of Jude and by 2 Peter. But they state that these entities came, and when they fathered the offspring, these giants took over. The legends of the Titans and the Greek gods, all of that ties back to these things. And they practically destroyed and enslaved humanity. In fact, they even ate human beings, according to the Book of Enoch. Jeez. And so that's why men cried out to God for relief, and that's why they were destroyed. But these entities, because they were not human, they didn't die. I don't think they had souls. They didn't die like men. They died and became these disembodied spirits roaming around seeking a body to inhabit, whether human or animal.
What do you think sleep paralysis might be, if it's not just a medical term?
You know, it's really interesting because it's dismissed as a medical or psychological thing if you look it up and search it on the web. But when you actually research the word like nightmare, it's derived from an Old English word mare, which is not the horse, but it's a mythological demon or goblin who torments others with frightening dreams. That's what the actual mare was. And so I myself have experienced this, and I'll share a story with you if you want later. But these demonic entities, I believe, are attempting to lure into deception, or it may be that what they're actually experiencing is the abduction phenomenon, and the screen memories that are given to them are all they can recall is maybe a bad dream.
Interesting. Now, what about your sleep paralysis experience? What happened to you?
Yeah, it's interesting because when I was young, I didn't grow up in a religious family at all, and we never darkened the door of a church. And I recall having recurring nightmares as a young child, and one of them involved I would be asleep in my own room in my bed, but I was awake. It's like I could see my body lying on the bed as if I was outside of my body, and I would watch the body rise up off the bed, with the covers off, and I started to float down a hallway, a long, dark hallway, which I assumed was my house, and it was going in the direction of, I guess, where my parents' bedroom was at the end of the house, but it was just dark and scary, and I would be struggling to wake up, but I couldn't move. You'd be screaming, but you couldn't move. And a very interesting thing happened recently, George, where this recurred a number of times, probably until I was around 13 or 14. And I'm now 60 years old. A few weeks ago, I was visiting my brother in Nashville, and he's just a few years younger than I am. And we were just having a discussion, and I never told him about this and never brought this up to him. We never talked about it. And I asked him if he had ever had any recurring nightmares when he grew up, when he was little. And he described the exact same dream that I had. Only difference was, he said, at the end of a dark hallway where there was some sort of an entity, some kind of he didn't describe it as a demon. I don't even think he's really a believer in the faith, but he described it as an entity. And, of course, the hair stood up on the back of my neck because we've never discussed this, and yet he had the same thing. And so I started thinking about, could these things be coming through because of something in our ancestry? Did we have some Masonic great-great-grandparent or some occult practice that made a covenant? And I began to look into generational curses.
Or a curse, yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
A generational curse. I think like the Kennedys were cursed a long time ago, weren't they?
Yeah. I believe that's very possible. If we take at literal value what God said in Exodus 20 about visiting the iniquities of the fathers upon the children, then you can see where that's coming from. At that point, Not no. I can say that I had two sets of grandparents. My maternal grandparents were people of faith. My paternal grandparents were not. And my own father was an only child that struggled. And I'll tell you just a funny, not really funny, but kind of an interesting story that I learned much, much later in life, that my father's mother, my paternal grandmother, was basically forced to marry my grandfather. I don't think she loved him. I think she wanted another man. In fact, she even ran away, and her father, my great-grandfather, dragged her back to the altar, and she had to marry what ended up being my grandfather. But I don't believe there was any love between the two of them. And my father grew up in that sort of dysfunctional environment, so he didn't know how to love. And therefore, my siblings and I were raised in a it was like a cycle, a pattern was being repeated. And interestingly enough, my grandmother's father was a Presbyterian minister, but she had enough of Christianity. She wanted nothing to do with it, and you can imagine why in her mind, after that. And so it's almost as though at somewhere in the family line where we might have been a family or people of faith, that faith was abandoned and that the curse began. And I don't know if it was with my grandmother or before that, but that's just the way I was analyzing it.
If you were to have told them then about fallen angels and aliens, what would they have said?
My family or my grandparents?
Yes.
I have one set of grandparents that would have talked to me with an open mind, and they were students of the Bible, and they were the people that probably were praying for me and gently encouraging me through that time of I would say, ignorance or darkness when I was young. So I thank God for them. They would have had that discussion with me. I've got other members of my family. I even asked my brother point blank, do you believe in demons? And without hesitation, he said no. Even though he shared the dream with me about the entities, he said no. So there's a cognitive dissonance, and I think we probably try to suppress bad memories, bad feelings, and that your body will remember what the mind forgets. So it can manifest itself through depression, and I think when we get bad enough in a mental state, we're going to be drawn to seek solutions in things like New Age or crystals or some false type of religion or teaching that's going to draw us away from the true source of healing, which I believe is through Jesus Christ.
Scott, it's my perception that people are acting strange these days, weird, uptight, not happy. Is something going on here?
Yeah, I truly believe it is, George. I think, among other things, there's certainly the stress of the world changing, and people feel it. They know it. And I think we're to the point where we're beginning to see the unveiling, the revealing of this year, with the Pentagon admitting that, the
UAPs, as they call them.
Yeah, exactly. The mothership out there, Oumuamua. I mean, all of those things are certainly adding to the uncertainty. These things like we were talking about earlier, George, generational curses, sleep paralysis, they've been going on a long time. But even the person that would have said, I saw a flying saucer would have been considered a kook or a conspiracy nut, tinfoil hat or something, even as early as maybe 10, 15 years ago. Now, there's sort of an explosion of research into this, and we're starting to look at the megalithic structures of the ancients. We're starting to have the Pentagon telling us there's a potential threat out there. They're talking about this so-called mothership. All of this is tied to this agenda. They're trying to prepare a group of humans that think these are benevolent, ascended masters.
Is it a plan underfoot to disguise the aliens as or the fallen angels as aliens, and why disguise it that way?
So we'll be received. So they will be received. In other words, if there's going to be this war in heaven between angels, and there's been skirmishes throughout history in the Bible, in the book of Daniel, we know there was an angel named Gabriel that came down to give some words to Daniel, and he was hindered 21 days by what he called the Prince of Persia. well, no earthly prince could have held an angel back. So, and in fact, Michael, the archangel, had to assist Gabriel to get through. So the enemy lines are around the earth right now, called the God of this world, and the book of Ephesians describes it as spiritual wickedness in high places. That's become very real to me. Rather than just paying it lip service, I now understand more of what's happening there. So when an angel of God comes down, they're crossing through enemy-occupied territory. They're crossing the front lines, and they're coming down. They are traveling, in my opinion, in these vehicles of conveyance. And the good angels use them, too, by the way. God's angels do travel in the same type of technology that the fallen angels do. So this battle is about to take place in Revelation 12, where these two factions are going to engage in all-out battle. Instead of just skirmishes here and there, it's going to be a war in heaven. And we actually talk about the war in heaven. One of our earliest episodes, was the war in heaven. And in this battle, Lucifer and his angels, or he's called the dragon, and his angels, they are defeated. And they'll be cast down to the earth. Well, they're going to show up. They're not going to admit defeat. They're not going to say, hey, we're the bad guys and we were just expelled out of heaven. They're going to come down in some form of a disguise. And the perfect disguise that would deceive humanity with all its disparate beliefs and religions and faiths to unite and worship one God, who's a man, a hybrid Nephilim, which is going to be called the beast. They're going to have some amazing deception take place. And the perfect deception would be, we're your alien ancestors. We seeded the monkeys millions of years ago, and now you're ready for your next phase of evolution.
Right. We're your gods.
Yep. And it's the same MO that the serpent, the dragon, people think of Adam and Eve in the garden with an apple tree and a snake. And it wasn't a snake wrapped around a tree. It was a dragon. And whatever it looked like was beautiful. And the temptation was, if you eat this fruit that God forbade you to eat, ye shall be as gods, knowing good and evil. The promise is always knowledge, technology, information. That's what the occult secret societies want, eternal life without God. Without God, they think they could do it through technology, also being promised to them by the fallen angels.
Scott, this infiltration, is it undergoing right now?
Absolutely. George, I know you've got some background in a faith and in scriptures, and you probably remember Jesus talking about the parable of the tares among the wheat.
Yes.
And tares are basically weeds, but they look just like wheat until they are full grown. And so we've always been taught that was, there'll be wicked people that have evil intentions amongst the Christians or the believers. But what if the tares is a metaphor for non-humans? Hybrids. That's what this abduction phenomenon is all about. They're building an army of Nephilim, and also to aid in the deception, they're building non-human hybrids that look like humans, tares among the wheat. And they're going to be the ones to say, hey, look at us. We look just like you, but we have these special powers. We're evolved. We're closer to being like gods. Incidentally, there's a man who's done some tremendous research on this. His name is L.A. Marzulli.
I know L.A. well.
Yeah, okay, so of course you do, yeah. Well, L.A. has recently put some pictures of an entity that was caught on a trail cam in Minnesota, and it looks for all the world like an elven, androgynous, Nordic type of entity. I believe it's a fallen angel. I believe it's real. There's what looks like an opening portal or an orb or something, and then seconds later this thing appears, and it's got the pointed ears. It's dressed in clothing that looks everything like what you might imagine an angel to wear, a fallen angel in this case. But the really chilling thing is he looks right at the camera. He knows, or he or it knows, it's being seen. It wanted to be seen. And I think that's part of the unveiling. They're starting to make themselves known. They're doing it by degrees because they don't want a War of the Worlds type scare thing going on like H.G. Wells or Orson Welles did back in the day. But I think they're trying to prepare us for it. And by the way, I believe the government's known about this since certainly Roswell, if not 1954, with that contract made between the Greys and Eisenhower.
If there was an original war between fallen angels and the good ones, will there be another one?
Yeah, that's the one that's coming. And it's going to be a final destruction of those angels. I think they're going to be cast down to the earth alive, and then they're going to be involving humanity in that final deception, because everything about the Bible hinges around one particular verse of Scripture, which is Genesis 3:15. After the serpent deceived Eve and she took and ate with her husband Adam, the serpent was cursed by God, and he said that I will put enmity between thee and the woman, between thy seed and her seed. It shall crush thy head, and thou shalt bruise his heel. So the seed of the woman is a prophetic statement of Christ, because women don't have seed, they have eggs. So the seed of the woman is an indication of Christ's divinity through the Immaculate Conception. But the seed of the serpent is a prediction that the Antichrist is going to be the literal child of Lucifer, the dragon, between he and a woman. And L.A. believes that entity is alive today.
What do you think?
I think it's very possible. And I'll tell you why. My theories may be a little bit different, but I see a time factor involved here. There is a verse of Scripture in 2 Peter where he wrote that a day with the Lord is as 1,000 years, and 1,000 years is one day. And if we take that to be some sort of a prophetic formula, and we take the Bible to be true as we understand the timeline, then Adam would have been created roughly 6,000 years ago. And we're almost at the end of 6,000 years, and the 7,000 year is about to begin. There's 7 days in the week. God created the earth in 6 days. On the seventh day, he rested. So everything about the rest, the Sabbath, is tied to that seventh day, which, according to the Bible, is a 1,000-year reign of Christ on the earth. So that's what's coming. Well, there's another passage that's kind of obscure in the book of Hosea the prophet, where it says in chapter 5, I will go and return to my place until they acknowledge their offense, and their affliction they will seek me early. And I believe that's a reference to when Christ was rejected by the nation Israel as Messiah. He returned back to the Father. But the very next verse, the next chapter says, it's like Israel, the nation, it's their reply to God, where they say, come, let us return to the Lord, for he is stricken and he will heal us. He is smitten and he will bind us up. After 2 days we will live in his sight. And so if I apply the formula of 2 days, Jesus Christ was crucified in A.D. 33. Now, I know we're on a Julian calendar, not a Hebrew calendar,
right,
but it's been nearly 2,000 years. What if 2033 is the end of the 2 days, which brings us to the end of the 6,000th year period, or the 6 a day?
Who ends up winning this battle, Scott?
The winner is going to be the Lord. When Jesus Christ
that's
returns,
good to know.
Yeah, he destroys these entities with the spirit of his mouth, with the sword, which is the word of God. They're literally going to melt on their feet when he returns. And then he's going to establish a kingdom on this earth that men have been wanting forever, which is justice, equity, no more war. They beat the swords into plowshares, spears into pruning hooks. The animal kingdom returns to the condition that it was before sin entered in, with the lamb laying down with the lion and all of that. And there'll be no more demons. They're all going to be cast into the lake of fire. So for 1,000 years, men are going to be living under a perfect government, and there'll be no excuses.
Scott, how did you get interested or involved in this?
Well, I've got to admit that there was a man in my church. I was looking into these things and thinking I was crazy, and I was the only one that thought this way. And there was a man in my church that brought me a book one day. He said, Pastor, this is my new favorite book. And it was called The Judgment of the Nephilim by Ryan Peterson. I think he's been on your show as well.
Yeah.
And when I read that book, I was like, wow, there's somebody else out there that thinks like I do. I thought I was crazy about the giants and all this stuff, and come to find out he's been one of our best guests and most popular guests. In fact, we just had a summit conference, our first annual debriefing 2023, and Ryan was our keynote speaker. So check him out if you haven't done so. And that book, and he's got another one called The Final Nephilim that covers a lot of this as well. But I gotta give him credit for really steering my thinking more towards this. But I've been looking into the Bible for many, many, many years and seeing that there was something different than religion was teaching.
Scott, thank you for being on the program. We've got your website linked up at coasttocoastam.com. He's also got BibleMysteriesPodcast.com, where you can hear his regular podcast. Up next, Dr. Brooks Agnu joins us. We're going to be talking with him about a litany of subjects, including the hollow earth and what might be happening with the Nephilim right here on Coast to Coast AM. And welcome back to Coast. George Norrie with you. Dr. Brooks Agnu back with us. Grew up in Pasadena, California, hanging around Jet Propulsion Laboratory in Caltech. He entered the Air Force back in 1973, graduated top in his class in electronics engineering. His scientific consulting company has served for years with Fortune 100 companies to save or bring back America more than 10,000 jobs. He is a multi-patented engineer. He's been and continues to be the CEO of an electric truck manufacturer in North Carolina. Brooks, welcome back.
Thank you so much, George. Good to be here.
How is that truck company doing?
Well, it's doing all right. Our designs are still superior. I'm amazed at how many people are now in the electric truck business, or at least report themselves to be. But they're all missing the mark. They still can't do what our truck can do.
No, not at all. You're one of a kind. And I remember doing that Beyond Belief TV show with you a few years ago. Folks are still emailing me about that.
That was too much fun. I love that program.
How many times have you been on Coast to Coast with us?
Oh, wow. I don't even know. Maybe 18 times.
That's not bad. Over the years, not bad at all. Lots to talk with you about tonight, Brooks. Let's get an update on the Hollow Earth and that expedition. And is it still in the plans?
Sure, yeah. We have worked for a long time on that project. We did a lot of minor trips. We went to Tibet and China and Japan and Mexico and places in Canada. We have discovered roots of the Hollow Earth story going all the way back to the 6th century. And the last remaining part of this global expedition, which we took on in 2006, is to go above the Arctic Circle and search for an opening in the crust between two oceans, one on the inside of the planet, one that we sail on the outside of the planet. And it has just proven to be, so financially taxing to pull that off that we haven't been able to do it yet. But we still have our sights set on 2024, so we're going to keep pushing forward. These things happen when they're supposed to happen. That's what I want to talk about tonight. That's why I think it's so important to bring the Nephilim into this mix, because this is a plan. It's been put together for a long, long time.
Let's jump into that now then, Brooks, and tell us about the tie-in with the Nephilim.
Well, we have an introduction to them, of course, in Genesis. We see their appearance first in the 6th chapter of Genesis, and then that's before the flood. And then the flood comes and destroys all the offspring of the fallen angels, who are also called Nephilim. So the Nephilim have Nephilim as offspring. So all of the offspring are killed off. But then after the flood, in Deuteronomy, they're mentioned again. So they kind of survived the flood. It's in our book series, The Ark of Millions of Years, we maintain that they knew the flood was coming, they prepared for the flood, and they got off planet during the flood and came back after the flood and reestablished themselves. However, they did not do the same campaign. They didn't mix with humans and try to create giants, because that was not a plan that worked out very well on this planet. Humans are much more formidable than any race of beings they've ever faced in the universe. So this time they decided to work inside the ranks of men, influencing them, giving them special knowledge, magic. It was the perfect theater for the Nephilim to operate in. They're small in numbers, but because of their immense knowledge and their power, and some of it supernatural, they're able to bless men who will give over their souls.
Would they look unusual walking down the street?
Yes, I believe they would. They are physical beings, but they're also spiritual beings. So they kind of walk in both worlds, as do we. We're spiritual beings having a mortal experience.
Can they be destroyed or hurt?
I believe they can, and many of them have been killed, and they have been imprisoned. That's why there are so few of them left. I believe around 4 of them are still here on the earth.
And you said there are only 4 left? That's it?
That's it. That's all the ones I can document. Now, there were 200 originally, but I can only find evidence for 4 of them now.
Where are they hiding out, do you think?
That's a really good question. We believe that one is in Cheyenne Mountain in Colorado. We believe that one is in Antarctica and has some kind of compound there. And the other 2, one is in Europe, probably in Brussels or the Netherlands, and the other one is in Asia.
Are they wealthy, Brooks?
Wealth doesn't mean anything to them. They don't accumulate physical wealth in the way that we do. Their value is, I know this is really going to sound odd because it's something that we don't really pay attention to. Their value in the universe is a word called glory. Glory is a very misunderstood concept. Even God wants glory, and it can do great things when he receives a lot of it from us. And it's almost mystical, but humans, and not just the physical body, but our spirit, we have the ability, unlike any other being on this planet, we have the ability to perceive time. We have the ability to use our observational energy to actually influence the state of planet Earth itself. We have a symbiotic relationship with the planet Earth.
You have written a lot about end times. Does it echo the book of Revelation?
It does and it doesn't. Revelation and the other books, the writings of John, talk about earthlings marching toward Armageddon and having this mighty battle, and then Jesus comes down and splits them out of olives. There's another extra biblical concept called the rapture, where the righteous are taken up into the clouds. We kind of sit in sky bleachers and watch the wicked burn as stubble. Personally, I don't want to be in those bleachers. I don't care anything about seeing something like that. But what we saw when we digested the 44 ancient cultures is that's not exactly what happens. Earth, being this living thing, this thing made of planet, made of higher energy matter and lower energy matter, was anciently merged together, a lot like our bodies are, a spirit and a physical body. And in the end times, it is prophesied that the 2 Earths will again separate. So that's why I wrote the Birth Trilogy, to describe how the spirit Earth separates from the physical Earth and how the race of mankind will also divide with that planet. The great cataclysms that we wrote about in the book that the ancients talked about, the Maya, the Babylonians, they all talked about great cataclysms in the last days where mountains become valleys, valleys become mountains, oceans leave their bounds, kinds of things, planetary upheaval.
Why does there seem to be so much hate on this planet?
Well, it's a very high energy emotion and a very low frequency. Our frequency is separating from the frequency of darkness, and that's all prophesied. It is said in the last days, light shall shine and the darkness shall comprehend it not.
Why is this happening now?
Well, that's a good question. I'm not so sure about the timing, but you recall 18 years ago, my first time on Coast to Coast, you asked me, because I had mentioned there was some event that was going to happen on Earth that made all the sentient beings in the universe look toward our planet. And that was the birth of Jesus Christ. This is the planet he was born on. He's not just the savior of Earth. He's the savior of the entire universe. That's why this is happening now. Right.
Ready for calls?
Sure.
Joe in the Bronx. Take it away, Joseph.
Hey, George, how are you?
Wonderful, of course.
Great show.
Thank you.
Dr. Agnew, I wanted to ask you about Tesla and his experiments that led to, well, what he wanted to do was provide free energy. He wasn't interested in commodifying it. So this, in my opinion, this would have led to infinite energy and free energy. What do you think about that concept?
I support the concept. Of course, he first started with DC, then he went to AC, then he realized that alternating current has a side effect on biology, so he decided to go back to DC. But Tesla was not a very good businessman. And when you say free energy, it doesn't necessarily mean it was free. You still had to do work to get it, but he wanted to make it free to the people. He wanted to radiate it throughout the city, and all you had to do was throw an antenna out the window, pick it up, and you could run your household off of it. It was a great concept.
We've got Jeff in Williston, North Dakota. Hey, Jeffrey, go ahead.
Hi, George. Thank you for having me on. Thank
Sure
you,
thing.
Dr. Brooks. I just want to give some quick comments and ask you ever heard of this, how Werner von Braun was a very important man we got from Germany, and he even put on this tombstone, Psalm 91, that says, the heavens declare the glory of God. So have you ever heard of this, Doctor, that Jupiter represents God the Father, Saturn represents Satan, Mercury represents Gabriel, the messenger angel, Venus, Jesus, Mars, Michael, the messenger angel, the moon, Israel. Have you ever heard of that, Doctor?
No, I really haven't heard of that. And I like the planets. I try to study all the lore I can, but I have not heard that one.
Next up, Charlie's with us, Chester, New Jersey. Hello, Charlie.
Thank you, George, for taking my call.
Thank you, Charlie.
Brooks, I was taught that the angels are actually the souls of plants and animals. The great goddess leads the religious angels, and God the Father leads the fallen angels. And Satan is actually a tree spirit from long ago.
What are your thoughts on that?
Legend as well. I've heard that legend as well.
Do you get involved much in angelic stories, Brooks?
Yes, ancient ones and modern ones. And I think that even existing mortal humans can be angels in mortal form. We have great power. In fact, we're on a different track of exaltation than angels are. Angels are limited in their ability to become exalted beings. Humans, absolutely unlimited. That's why we are so valuable to all the forces in the universe.
Where do people get your books? They're still available.
Oh, yeah, easy to do. Amazon, Barnes & Noble, everywhere fine books are sold. You can also get them on my website. I'll sign them and send them to you that way. It's just simple, brooksidley.com. Go to the store. Everything is there.
What's your next major project, Brooks?
Well, I'm working on Book 12, which is a sequel to Charm of Favor, and I'm trying to turn the Birth Trilogy into a TV series.
Good for you. And you're going to continue with the electric truck company?
Yes, I don't think we'll go into full production with it now. Just too old now and spent too much money. But the project is ready. It's debt-free. It's ready to go into production, and we are talking with entities from all the way from South Africa to Canada.
Super. Brooks, thanks again for being on the program. George Norrie with you, a mind-opening Bible teacher, host of Bible Mysteries podcast. Scott Mitchell has been a student of the Bible, founder of the Unlock the Bible Now ministry. After years of study, Scott found the key to unlocking the secrets in the Bible. Armed with a Pauline passage to be faithful stewards of the mysteries of God, Scott began Bible Mysteries podcast and his utbnow.com website to share the truth about what the world is trying to hide. Scott, welcome back. How have you been?
Well, thank you. We're out there doing our best with the time we have left.
What was it that first got you interested in biblical studies?
You know, seeing some truth in high school, early high school, began to get me interested. And oddly enough, it was through my sister who was dating a boy that ended up being a close friend of mine, but that boy's father was a pastor and teacher, and I began attending a Bible class there. And it just so happens that in my adolescence, around 12 or 13, I began to have recurring nightmares. demonic type things. And I was not raised in a religious home, so I didn't know where this was coming from. But when I started to attend this Bible class, the subject matter was demonology. And I began to understand that, the more you understand something, the less you fear it. And so the dreams stopped, the nightmares stopped, and I began to study the scriptures as a result of that.
Good for you.
I was about 15, maybe.
Now, tell us the context of the Bible and the fallen angels. What is the Bible version?
Well, the Bible version is that the angelic realm has been around for many, many thousands of years prior to mankind, as far as I'm concerned. And there was a kingdom. It's the kingdom of God still. But before there was a man, there were angels and different angelic beings. And at some point, there was an insurrection by one particular cherub named Lucifer, who decided to rebel because he wanted more than his position. He appears to have been a king of some sort of the earth. And in this rebellion, a third of the angels joined him. They were defeated. There was some sort of an intergalactic war that took place, and the resulting chaos and destruction was the planet we find in Genesis chapter 1, verse 2. It's without form and void, and there's darkness, and there's destruction. So we believe that was the wrath of God poured out upon that angelic realm that rebelled, and God, in his mind, said, I can do better with dirt than I can do with you created beings. So he made Adam and gave man dominion of the earth, and the angels have been angry ever since, and have been the fallen ones, and they've been trying to take it back. So the war continues on, and we're just the latest group of individuals that God is trying to demonstrate, as far as I'm concerned, his great love and mercy in giving mankind this opportunity for redemption, which he did not give the angels that rebelled. They have a judgment to come, and so do men, but we have a choice. And we can choose to believe on the salvation that God provided and live with him eternally, or we can choose to join the rebel factions of angels if we want.
Scott, what is the coming great deception?
Well, we believe it involves these angels, and I personally think that they are masquerading as aliens. That the narrative seems to be shifting a little bit, because for the longest time it's been, they're extraterrestrials, there's life on other planets, and there's still many people that believe that and think so. But even with the latest limitations of disclosure coming from the Pentagon through congressional hearings, the narrative is starting to shift from extraterrestrial to interdimensional. Mm-hmm. And I think that's where the deception is they're going to try to convince us these are beings that are maybe interdimensional beings. But in fact, I believe they are the fallen angels and their minions. They're known as principalities, powers, spiritual wickedness in high places in the Bible in Ephesians chapter 6.
Now, what does your gut tell you? Do you think they're interdimensional or not?
I'm beginning to wonder about that. I have no reason to argue that there could be interdimensional aspects to these beings, but I'm not so sure. When you think of things like the Marvel multiverse and stuff like that, which may or may not be true, it's just fiction. But is it possible that in reality they're in our own realm? We just can't see them. They're in the same laws of physics that we occupy, but in the same way that, like, the ocean is teeming with life below the surface, but we just see water. Perhaps it's something like that. And I reference that based upon a passage of Scripture in 2 Kings where a prophet named Elisha, however you like to say it, was trying to be killed by the army of the Syrian king. And they surround Elisha and his servant, and the servant's like, "Oh no, we're dead men. We're done for. They're going to kill us." And Elisha said, "Nah, don't worry. There's more of us than there are of them." And the guy says, "What are you talking about? It's just two of us." Well, this is 2 Kings chapter 6. But Elisha prayed, and he said, "Lord, open his eyes that he may see." And when the Lord opened the servant's eyes, he looked, and the mountains were filled with the chariots of God and with his host or army. So it's possible that they were always there, but we just don't have eyes to see them any longer. Perhaps there was a time when we could see these entities, such as Eve in the garden discussing with the serpent,
Well, why pose as aliens? What's their motivation for that?
Well, it would seem to me that there's coming some kind of war, whether it's going to be an attack from the skies as aliens, maybe entities posing as one faction or another, and another faction of angels comes to be our rescuers, or whether they're perhaps slowly giving us technology through some sort of a contractual arrangement, which we can discuss later, but they're going to allow us enough rope to hang ourselves, so to speak. We may be piloting some of these Delta-looking craft, and that's humans doing it, but ultimately we're going to have so much power that war could be leading to ultimate destruction, like a nuclear war. Or it may simply be a nuclear war, but they intervene to stop us from destroying ourselves, and we'll look upon them as these heroes, these saviors, these Asgardian Nordic type rescuers of some type, when in fact they may be hiding a more sinister form.
What do they want, Scott? What's their motive?
The motive seems to be, and some postulate that this is a contest in a sense, after this rebellion, God said to Satan and his angels, because Lucifer became the dragon, and maybe always was the dragon, but he is the enemy, the adversary, Satan, and so he may have challenged the unfairness in his mind. You can't punish us. We're this, we're that, and so this is almost like a test, as the story of Job is similar. God said, "Have you seen him? He's righteous," and the devil said, "Do this to him, and he'll curse you to your face." So I suspect all of this is like a legal challenge, and ultimately it's for the destruction. It's to prove that God is just in all that he's doing, and that the fallen angels are unjust.
That's conceivable. It truly is.
Yeah.
And if there's truly this great deception underway, we could be into a big, big problem, right?
Yes, especially if the narrative continues the way it's going, because if these supposed rescuers or heroes come down and they say, we are in fact your ancestors, we seeded you. There's this panspermia idea, that Earth was seeded with the DNA of these more intelligent beings, or our own species from the future, or something like that. Whatever their theory is, that they'll come back and say, "Hey, you're now ready for your next step of evolution. We have this pill you can swallow, or injection you can take, or this technology we can incorporate into your human genome," and they'll manipulate the genealogy of man, or the genetic makeup of man, and we become hybrids as they were back in Genesis 6. The angels definitely have been genetically manipulating humanity for quite a while.
This creation of hiding as aliens does not negate the fact that there could be real aliens from other planetary sources, right?
It certainly could be true. I'm of the opinion that they may not be. I don't rule it out and say it's impossible. There could, in fact, be other beings in other worlds, but there's so much emphasis on the Earth, and we could say, well, we don't know about any of the battles going on in other star systems and other galaxies, but if that was the case, why fight over this one rock? If there's billions or millions of Earth-like planets, what's the fascination with this one? And I think it has a lot to do with this is the only one. This is the one that God created for a purpose, and this is where his throne is, and this is where Lucifer wants to reign, because he wants to be like God.
Some believe that governments are in cahoots with the aliens or the fallen ones secretly. What's your thoughts on that?
I think that's true. In fact, that would explain to me the obfuscation of all the disclosure that's trying to be held through congressional hearings to get somebody in the government or the Pentagon or somewhere to admit what we have here. You've heard of the testimonies of men like David Grush and others.
Yeah.
who say, and notice the term they use is non-human biologics is what they claim they have, instead of coming out and saying they're aliens. And I believe they're aware of the fact that these are demonic beings and fallen angels, because there was that story that many people say is corroborated about Eisenhower in 1953, and some sort of a contract was made between this government and the Greys, or whoever the entities were pretending to be. And I suspect there might be similar contracts with other nations, but in our nation, allegedly, they said in exchange for advanced technology, you allow us to abduct people for genetic experimentation, which to me is what the alien abduction program is all about, to manipulate human DNA for the purposes of whatever their goals are.
They seem to bring the abducted person back, don't you think?
Yeah. In almost many cases, I don't know of a single abduction experience where the person was abducted and then killed, although there could be some. But most accounts are viewed by the average person as, they're taken in a spaceship somewhere, they experiment them in some form of an operating room, and then they bring them back. But we've interviewed abductees, we've talked to people and authors and specialists on our show, Bible Mysteries, and I'm of the conclusion that they're trying to breed hybrid human, quote-unquote, aliens, although it's more like Nephilim from Genesis 6. They're actually angelic beings or something, fallen angels that are doing this. And the aim is to either reduce the population of the earth to 500 million, like Georgia Guidestones encourages, or to create this army to fight against the Lord when he comes back.
Take a few moments here, Scott, and tell us about the podcast, the Bible Mysteries podcast.
Yeah, we started the podcast in 2020, and it was to get this information out. We felt like churches aren't addressing this. They kind of bury their heads in the sand when it comes to things in the Bible, like the giants of Genesis 6 and many visions or appearances of angels, which we believe are what some think are UFOs, but that's really what they are. They're these angelic beings that have advanced technology. And there's many, many other things to that. So we started the podcast with the idea that we wanted to reach people that maybe had never picked up a Bible in their life, but they would hear a topic like this and sort of be like shocked out of their senses. That's in the Bible? And the hope was they would have an interest in digging a little deeper to see what other things there might be, and maybe realize that some of the answers maybe they were looking for, because there's many people that have these questions. They're seeing these things going on in the world today, and they're wondering, what is happening? I think people sense something's not right, but there's a lot of cognitive dissonance out there, and we don't want people to fall for the deception that's going to come as, oh, these are our alien space brothers. They're here to help us, It's like what are the 6 scariest words? We're from the government, and we're here to help, or something like that.
Take us to your leader, or whatever.
Yes.
The possibility of extraterrestrials, fallen angels, are they after our soul? Is that the goal? I'm not so sure that's a prize they can obtain, because a soul. So if you think about a human being as being composed of 3 parts, much like God himself is Father, Son, and Holy Spirit, we are body, soul, and spirit. So in that sense, we are created in the image of God. My view of that is the physical body is the house of the soul, and the soul houses the spirit. So when a person dies, let's say, it is their spirit and soul that continue on. I don't know that these fallen entities can do anything with that. God is in control of that. So it's not like they might be able to steal the body and do experiments to it and even impregnate women that have been abducted, but they can't take a soul. There's this Faustian idea that the devil is in hell trying to steal your soul. Well, he's not in hell. That's the realm he's going to be condemned to at some point, in the lake of fire. So he's not actually in hell waiting or anything with a pitchfork.
he's actively involved in manipulating nations against nations and these angelic battles that are going on. So the soul, to me, is not what he's after. He's trying to get humanity to worship him and rebel against the God of creation. That seems to be his MO.
So you have no doubts there is evil out there and there are demons.
Absolutely. And the demons, when you think about it, you pick up a Bible and you start reading, and suddenly you run into an encounter with an evil spirit, like Jesus casting out devils in the New Testament. And I read that many times, even though I wasn't raised religiously. At some point, I started to get interested in the Bible and study it. And I would read a passage and never think to ask, well, where did these unclean spirits come from? Why are they here? Why would they just exist? That God didn't make them that way. Why would he create evil spirits? So you begin to dig deeper, and you start to find out that, well, they had to come from somewhere. And we believe that they're the disembodied spirits of the hybrid Nephilim or giants of Genesis 6, where the sons of God took the daughters of men. And we postulate that because they're not fully human, they don't have souls. They have a spirit, which is the unclean spirit, but when they died in the flood of Noah, they were doomed, and according to the Book of Enoch, which is not in the Bible, but it's considered historical, they are the disembodied spirits of the Nephilim, doomed to roam the earth, which is why they seek to possess human bodies and do other sorts of mischief.
What does the Catholic Church say about this?
I'm not sure of the Catholic Church's official position about demons. They obviously recognize they're real, and that's the whole reason for the methodology of exorcism.
That's right. They've got at least 120 exorcist priests out there, don't they?
Exactly. So they clearly acknowledge and admit that they exist. Whether or not they know that or they believe that it came from the disembodied spirits of Nephilim, that I'm unclear on. We're going to be discussing this in some upcoming episodes, BibleMysteriesPodcast.com, if anybody wants to learn how to join or subscribe or listen. But it's available on any podcast app. But I ran across some information about apparently it was the son of a commanding officer who was over a group in Vietnam during the war, and red night vision goggles technology had just been introduced, and they were being deployed by selective groups in Vietnam. And it's interesting, the commanding officer was the father of this person speaking about this, was saying that they were told and instructed not to wear the goggles or the pilots of these helicopters in this group, only the soldiers. And so at the time, the technology was a red spectrum light in these night vision goggles, where today they use a green, I believe. But what was happening was, as a group of choppers were flying over friendly territory on a mission, the soldiers that were wearing these night vision goggles began to see things. And they were seeing demonic-like entities. One gunner actually began firing into the air almost crazily, and he was coming close to hitting some of the other helicopters. So this particular CO went back there to just totally read him the riot act, suspecting that maybe he was high on drugs or something. But he didn't show those symptoms. And so at one point, this CO put the goggles on himself, and he saw just what the guy was describing, winged like gargoyle-type creatures that were actually pointing in his direction, seeing him and moving towards him and attacking him, and that's why he was shooting. They subsequently stopped using these night vision goggles. I think it was about a 60-day time, but it's just interesting to think that they were told only the soldiers should wear these. That kind of indicates to me that two things. Number one, the government was aware of these entities and what they would do, and number two, maybe they're not from other dimensions. They're just in a spectrum that we can't see, kind of pointing back to that story of Elisha in 2 Kings chapter 6.
Right. That's very possible. What do you think? What's your gut tell you?
My gut tells me that they are right here. That they're all around us in the same way that Elijah said, Lord, open his eyes that the servant may see. They're around us, but we lost the ability to see them, perhaps, as Eve did when she conversed with the serpent in the garden. I think the sin condition entered into humanity, and perhaps it's a protective mechanism while we're in this condition and while we were waiting for redemption from the Lord. Had we seen these entities and would be able to interact with them, we might just go crazy. We're just not in a position to be able to process that right now. In many instances, and throughout the scriptures, when angels appeared, even God's angels, to prophets or holy men of God, these men lost the ability to stand. They fainted. There's some form of paralysis that takes over them, and that's also true in more sinister applications where abductees are reported as being unable to move, or they go unconscious or whatever when they're being transported, and in my opinion, not to other planets, but to deep underground military bases.
Scott, what are these craft, these objects that people report seeing all over the place? What are they, and how are they tied into this?
Well, I believe the UFOs and the crafts that people are spotting are, in fact, fallen angel technology. And for that matter, they could be the good angels, too. You know, we have this conception of angels from, Renaissance art and things like that, of these, beautiful, blonde, human-like people with wings and whatever the typical...
On clouds.
Yeah, exactly. And maybe they don't look like that at all. Maybe there's something completely different, and they're actually, I guess you would say humanoid or human-like in many respects, but perhaps, and we're going to get into, if you want, the beings in the Bible called Seraphim, which are very serpent-like creatures and could be the source of reptilians. But my take on this is they have technology. They use technology to open portals from their spiritual realm into ours, or to bring us up to them, or whatever the case may be. And they're operating under the exact same laws of physics as us. They're physical, they're corporeal, but they're just spiritual beings. They're spiritual realm. I don't know if it's another dimension so much. It's just a realm, like I said, like the underwater realm, but we can't breathe or operate down there.
So let's talk about the seraphim for a moment. What are they?
Well, the seraphim is the Hebrew word seraph, and it's translated as a fiery flying serpent. And in fact, there's a passage in Isaiah that refers to the root of the Assyrian being a fiery flying serpent, and I believe that's a reference to the coming Antichrist. Since the angel, or rather Lucifer, was a fallen angel, and he was called a cherub, it's possible that cherubs and seraphim or seraphs are similar in makeup. Maybe they have a reptilian look to them. I mean, Lucifer was called the serpent in the garden. He's called the dragon in Revelation 12. He's called Leviathan. So is it possible that in this war of rebellious angels, a number of high-ranking angels were seraphim that rebelled, and they became the dragon princes? Or perhaps the seven-headed beast of Revelation is representative of 6 other fallen dragon princes, and Lucifer was one of them. And maybe they are the reptilians. Those are the ones that have been manipulating humanity's DNA and interfering with the affairs of men. So perhaps they are, in fact, the actual reptilians.
Whatever is happening out there, Scott, whatever is happening, it doesn't seem like it's very good for us.
No, this is ultimately what Jesus warned about in the Gospels when he talks about the last days and the ends of times. And he said, fearful sights and signs shall there be in heaven and earth. And I think we're just starting to see that begin to proliferate. At some point, he says, men's hearts are going to fail them for fear. I think the stage is being set for a lot more paranormal activity to occur on the earth in plain sight. It's no longer going to be relegated to the spectrum of conspiracy nuts and tinfoil hat people, as they've accused us for so many decades. They can no longer dismiss it anymore. So it's going to be to the point where men, according to the Bible, are going to realize all this is happening. understand it's God coming back to pour his wrath out on the dragon and his angels and those that join with them. And they're going to literally ask the Antichrist to help them, to save them, to protect them from Yahweh, from the God of creation, because they're going to say, look, at some point they say, who is able to make war with him in Revelation 13? He's going to have such advanced technology, they're going to think that he can actually defeat God the Creator and Jesus, his son.
Scott, how many biblical experts would agree with you?
There's more and more.
It's growing.
We find. Yeah, it's growing. We find them, and when we do, and we find out maybe they've written books or made videos or whatever, and we interview them. So I thought when I began this that I was the only one, that I was nuts, And then I discovered my dear friend Ryan Pitterson, who wrote a book called Judgment of the Nephilim, and then I learned about L.A. Marzulli and Chuck Missler and Ali Siadatan and Sylvia McKelvey and all these like MUFON researchers or people that are martial arts instructors from Persia or L.A. who's been doing this for many years, and you know him. They've been researching this stuff, and it was like, oh my goodness, I'm standing on the shoulders of giants. We had no idea there were so many, and they're growing in number.
No, they really are. LA's a genius when it comes to this, isn't he?
He truly is, and we'll be having him again on our show in March. But he seems to have his finger on the pulse of what's going on better than just about anybody that I know. And so I consider him sort of the current expert in the field of everything to do with crop circles, ufology, and, of course, the giants and the Nephilim.
What are the reptilians, and where do they fit into this?
Well, my thinking, I'm beginning to postulate this idea that they are, in fact, these seraphim-type angels, since we know there's more than one type of angelic being. The word angel in the Bible literally just means messenger, whether it's, angelos in the Greek or whether it's from the Hebrew. It's going to represent a job or position rather than the entity itself. If we say a person is a man or a woman, we're identifying the being that they are. When we say the word angel, that comprises more than one type of being. We've got seraph or seraphim, we've got cherubs. We have apparently angels that are military and mighty, such as Michael the Archangel. And then we have other angels that might be strictly messengers, such as Gabriel, although that doesn't mean he's limited in that capacity. So I would say reptilians may simply be these fallen serpent-like creatures, and perhaps they do have a dragon or lizard-like appearance, maybe not the way we see it in science fiction movies, but perhaps in some form that apparently didn't repulse Eve because she had no problem conversing with the serpent in the garden. And since the Bible tells us in 2 Corinthians that Satan is able to be transformed as an angel of light, I suspect they might be shapeshifters of some type, and that they could change their form, and perhaps they disguise themselves as much more attractive-looking things because humanity maybe isn't ready to accept what they truly look like or would be too frightened to see it. So perhaps they sometimes appear as the Nordic-looking creatures. And incidentally, L.A. had somebody send in video of a trail cam where it looks like a portal is opening and a very elf-like Nordic-looking entity appears on the trail cam. It's fascinating. I believe it's real, and it very well could be one of these entities.
Scott, keep doing what you're doing, my friend. We need you.
Thank you, George, and keep doing what you're doing. We thank God for your show.
George Norrie with you, our special guest, Dr. Brooks Agnu. You brought us an interesting theory that you brought us back in 2007, and you brought us the trilogy called the Birth Trilogy. Tell me about that.
Oh, yes. Well, when I finished the Arc of Millions of Years, which was a study into 44 ancient cultures and their idea of what planet Earth was and what their relationship with the Earth was, most of the societies had decided that planet Earth was a living thing, that it had its own consciousness, that it had, not necessarily its own will, but it was affected by the consciousness of the race of mankind living upon it. And so when mankind was wicked, they believed that Earth would have kind of an allergic reaction, it would have a tidal wave or a volcano or earthquake or something to really knock mankind back down to a few tribes where they had to begin again. But when mankind was good and nice and peaceful to each other, Earth would release its bounty to them and they would prosper. And this relationship went on for thousands of years, and it was recorded in all kinds of media, stone and gold and paper and clay. And so I said, well, why not carry this forward into modern times? And I wrote Volume 1 of the Birth Trilogy. I didn't know it was Volume 1 at the time. But it was basically there are 8 billion people on the planet right now, and about half of them are wicked and half of them are good. And we grew rather fast compared to the Earth. I mean, the last 300 years, the race of mankind really, really blossomed. We learned to sail, we learned to fly, we learned to, get resources out of the ground. We've been to space, and Earth just couldn't keep up with us. So Earth, as this conscious being floating through space, decides it comes to a moment of indecision where it doesn't want to destroy us, but it also doesn't want to continue to release its bounty to us. So it decides to split back into its original forms from the Book of Genesis. Remember, we had a spirit form that was created somewhere in the galaxy where Eve or Eden was, and then we had a temporal Earth to which Noah and his ship and that planet were cast, and the two kind of came to equilibrium sometime around 6,800 years ago, and the race of mankind today is the result of that equilibrium. So it turned into a quasi, story about the rapture, but it was much more than that. It was more of a sci-fi side where the planet itself was actually dividing into a higher energy form and a lower energy form. And then what was happening is the race of mankind began dividing with it. There were humans that were of higher vibration, and they tended to have an affinity with the higher vibrational planet as it was phasing away. And the lower vibrational humans had an affinity with the dark and cold rock and metal Earth around this sun here in this solar system. And so I finished the first volume, and I thought, well, I'll write another one in a couple of years. That's about my pace. That's not what happened at all, George. That Volume 2 woke me up at like 3 o'clock in the morning, the day after I published Volume 1, and the Grand Division was written.
Now, are you a believer in UFOs?
I'm not a believer in anything. I am a scientist, so I'm going strictly from facts. But if I look at the facts, and a fact is a direct observation, technically speaking, it's pretty hard to deny. Now, I've seen 2 at night, and I photographed 1 during the day. So I have a photograph of 1. It's kind of blurry, and it's a crystal clear blue sky day. The craft itself is blurry. But I have to believe that millions of people seeing UFOs every single year cannot be wrong. So I think the UFOs exist. At one time, maybe there was this, maybe a cultural worry that society would collapse, that, people would lose faith in their religions and, there'd be mass suicides. But I think we're past that. I think people would say, yeah, it's about time. Let's realize that we're not alone in this solar system, that there are visitors here, or there have been races here much, much longer than us. And it's about time we got to know each other.
Do you actually think they're here peacefully?
That's a very good question. And we have this discussion from time to time, and I kind of go through this in like Boolean logic. We ask these binary questions. So we make a scientific assumption, okay, they're here. They're here. And let's make a scientific assumption that they're not local. In other words, they haven't been on Earth for hundreds of thousands of years. They're not the leftovers of some other zenith of humanity, that they're from somewhere else. some star system, some other planet, or even some other dimension. So we get to that point, we ask this binary question. Are they here to work with us, or are we working with them? And the observation is, in our little experiment here, they're not working with you and me. They haven't come on coast to coast. They haven't come to contact in the desert out on stage and said, here we are, which is where all their, I guess, acceptance would come from.
Yeah.
No, they tend to work only with governments. Governments of Germany, governments of Russia, governments of China, governments of the U.S. So if that's the observation, we go back to that question. Are they working with us, or are we working with them? And if you say, well, if we're working with them, what are we trading to them for all this advanced knowledge that we apparently are reverse engineering?
Brooks, at what point did you get to this point that you believe this? What was that deciding factor for you?
Well, I mean, it was a point where I couldn't deny it any longer. You can't just say, like a lot of my astronomy friends, when we go sky watching, they don't believe in UFOs. They don't even want to talk about UFOs. If you start talking about them, they make you go to the car. At some point, you have to say, you can't deny this consciousness that we're being visited from somewhere else, physically, not just ghosts or spirits or vapors, actual physical beings coming here. And if our governments are trading human beings to them in exchange for advanced technology to build, I don't know, weapons or anti-gravity drives or whatever, I think it's about time for it to end. But let's go to the second binary question. What if they're here to work with us and they're just working with governments? That leads me to believe that these advanced civilizations are running the show. And everything we see on the news as far as our juxtaposition of various ideologies on this planet is all they're doing. And I could go back through history. I could say, okay, there are 8 billion of us here. We can fly. We got some pretty badass weapons right now. Lasers, missiles, all kinds of stuff. How hard would it have been to take over the world when we were on horseback, shooting arrows and throwing rocks at each other?
Pretty darn easy. Pretty darn easy.
Yeah. And if you go back and look at the civilizations that lived here on this continent before Christopher Columbus got here, who was it? Who was here? It was the Native Americans, right? They were here.
Yep.
And so what were they doing? Well, history tells us they were doing the same thing. They were riding hundreds of miles and committing genocide against other tribes. The Blackfoot, the Cherokee, the Apache,
the Hopi.
Yeah, they were all fighting one another. And it wasn't as though, there's not enough buffalo, there's not enough fish, not enough corn, not enough land or wood. I mean, they didn't have a scarcity of anything.
No, at that time they had an abundance of everything.
Sure. So why were they traveling 5 days by horseback to go kill a village and wipe out the whole thing? Because their gods told them to. Well, maybe the aliens have been here all along. And this is what they thrive on. They thrive on human conflict.
We started this discussion talking about a dual Earth theory. Tell me about that.
Well, when I first came on Coast to Coast in 2005, we just finished the first volume of the Arc of Millions of Years. And what we had discovered in that first book, which is about, close to 500 pages, maybe a little longer than that, is that Earth was both 4.5 billion years old and a little over 6,000 years old. And there was evidence of both. And, both of them were undeniable. And when scientifically I resolved that, I likened it to having a 5-gallon bucket full of glass marbles. That's lower energy matter. You could still fill that bucket up with water, which is the higher vibrational matter, filling in the space. So you have two forms of matter occupying the same space at the same time, which is the bucket. That's kind of what Earth is. Earth is higher vibrational matter, which has consciousness. It respirates. It tends towards stasis. It protects itself against toxins. If there's a bad fire or an earth spill or a volcano, and within a few decades, Earth evens out again and comes back to its, blue gorgeousness in the space. So that description of Earth matches the description that we see in Genesis, where we have a spiritual creation, Adam and Eve, Garden of Eden, etc., and we have a fallen Earth to which Noah and his ship, which he called the Ark of Noah's Years, by the way, Noah gets in his ship, sails for 7 months, and ends up in wherever with his ark, lands on the Mount of Ararat. But theory, or at least the observation, that these two Earths merged in this spot around this sun, in this outer rim of the Milky Way galaxy, and that one day it's going to return to its paradisaical glory. That's where the dual Earth theory came from.
Now, when you say merged, was it a collapse, a collision?
Yes, it was. But because they're two phases of matter, they didn't destroy each other. They amalgamated.
They become one?
Well, they became two occupying the same space in the same time here around, this sun. They are still in conflict, but in some reasonable harmony. And what's happening now is we're beginning to see this Coriolis force, which is what happens when you have any rotating body. You have a Coriolis effect, which is a force which moves at a right angle to the rotation. It wants to do that. But when you have two bodies, one revolving inside the other one, they will tend to oscillate. They'll modulate. And what we're seeing with the movement of our magnetic pole, like a lot, it's really wobbling, like hundreds of miles now off course. That is evidence of a Coriolis effect of two bodies revolving around the same axis.
What do you think of the Bible, Brooks? I had a guest on last night who thought it was not what we think it is. What about you?
My take on it is I've read it a lot, and I taught Sunday school for 25 years.
25 years?
Yeah, I'm not a novice. I've been through it a lot of times with a lot of students.
I guess so.
I feel it is a remnant. It is a remnant. There is evidence of big areas in the Bible where there's no footprints. Something is missing. Something was removed. This pathway we started in Genesis 1 meanders through the Old Testament, and there are big areas of beach that have no footprints. It means somebody removed something, and they removed it for a reason. Now, I hear people make the argument, well, that's because, God only wants us to have this much. Yeah, but I got news for you. Man only wants us to have this much. So true as it is, I think the Bible is a remnant. I think there's a lot more to it than what is in the Bible.
What do you think of the story of the Nephilim?
I first read the Book of Enoch when it was just fragments. There was a Slavic version of it that was translated into English, and I think there were only 2 copies of it on the planet at the time Thomas Jefferson was president. It was that rare. Now we have a lot of good publications of the Book of Enoch and way more interpretations of the Book of Enoch. But one thing becomes clear. The prophet Enoch absolutely, definitely existed. He is quoted lots of times in the New and Old Testaments. The fact that he was trusted by the giants of that day, which there was a tribe of giants called the Nephilim, but there were also fallen angels who didn't interact with Enoch, but who were also called Nephilim. So people get them confused, but there was a tribe of giants called Nephilim, and there were other tribes of giants, the Anakim and the Jibbarim and all these different tribes. They trusted Enoch, and they came to Enoch and said, look, we're not bad people. Yeah, we might be 18 feet tall and, we don't live as long as you, but we're good people and we want to be saved. And so Enoch went to God and asked God, what about it? These guys really helped us. They helped us build buildings and they helped us, redirect rivers. And what about it? And God said, no. And what was the reason? And this is kind of what comes out of the Book of Enoch, that there is a bloodline of DNA on this planet that comes from Lucifer, and that cannot be saved. And that DNA is capable of housing demons. You remember demons like the third of the host of heaven cast out.
Right.
They don't come to Earth the same way we do. We come through what's called the well of souls.
How many of those are running around here?
Well, you figure, George, if it's a third of the host of heaven, I don't know how big that was, but there's 8 billion of us alive on the Earth. I don't know, maybe there's a 500 billion spirits out there. Some are not alive right now, but they will be again someday when we die. There might be a lot. We might be outnumbered 20-1 right now as far as mortals on the Earth.
Jeez.
But that's in spirit form. If they could be born here in the flesh, we have a real problem on our hands, because these people are born knowing they cannot be saved.
What do they want?
They want to win the war, the same war that we were fighting before this world was formed. I don't know I don't know what the winner is. I don't get it, but they have to know that eventually they're going to lose. I read the book. We win in the end, but
is that a war for our souls?
It is. And they can't beat us because there's enmity. There's all kinds of covenants and things that are in place because we kept our first estate. But we could lose our second one. We could give up our soul. And I think that's what the real battle is over.
Are you scared? Does it bother you?
No, I don't have any fear over it. I know that I'm indestructible. I'm a individual soul address in the universe. And if they kill my physical body, it's no issue to me. I will get another one.
When we first started talking back in 2005, weren't you going to take a trawler into the center of the Earth?
Well, that's kind of a condensation, but it wasn't a trawler. It was a Russian nuclear-powered icebreaker.
What happened?
Well, life happened, but and we were going to plan to go in 2008, you remember, so we started raising money in 2007, and we raised awareness, and we did a pilot film, and things were going along fine, and then the economy had something else in mind in 2008, so it all got kind of mothballed for a while. So then we were going to try again, and we started putting the funds together. We got it all together in 2020. Actually, it was 2019. You have to plan these things a long time in advance. So we actually bought the plane tickets. We bought the train tickets. We put our cameras together. We were all ready to go on what we call a dry run. We were going to fly to Moscow, then go to St. Petersburg, then go up to Murmansk. We were going to get on the ship, interview, make sure everything, the pathway and the logistics were all figured out. We'd spent the money. We had our team ready to go. And then the lockdown came. And we lost all our money. The Aeroflot wouldn't refund our money, and we lost all the money on the trains. And it was a disaster. We lost a lot of money, but it's no big deal. But it was just frustrating because we were all ready to go in 2021.
You had everything was lined up, right?
In 2020, yeah, we were ready for the Roaring 20s like everybody else was.
What do you think you would have discovered?
Objectively, I think we might have just seen whales and ice. But scientifically, we wanted to be prepared for everything, because this is kind of like going into the wilderness and you have to take everything with you. If you forgot an extension cord or something like that, you can't go back and get it. There's no resupply ship. So we were going to take 100 scientists, 6 different universities. We were going to get on the ship and sail for 15 days. That's out of Murmansk. We were going to be crunching ice for about 7.5 days, be on location for about a half a week, maybe 4 days, and then sail back to Molucas. That was the plan. So the hope was that we were going to an area of the Arctic Ocean that nobody had ever sailed before. You can't get to it unless you have a Russian nuclear-powered icebreaker. There's no other ship on Earth that can make this trek except these Arctica-class ships. So it was going to be amazing in the sense that we were going to lay eyes on an area of Earth no man had ever seen before. Now, these oceans are about 4,400 meters deep. So obviously, if we're going to get samples off the bottom, because the idea was that if there is a vent in the crust that connects these two oceans, one on the inside of the crust and the one we're sailing on, there's got to be a high concentration of fossils and chemistry and all kinds of things around that opening. And so that assumption leads these 6 universities to check crystallinity, water chemistry, magnetism, and of course to get samples off the bottom. So we had to design, and I'm a pretty good designer, we had to design equipment to drop over the side of the ship that could go all the way to the bottom, grab a core of, say, the top meter of silt on the bottom, and then reinflate and come back to the surface and deliver that sample to us.
Richard, Admiral Byrd would have been proud of you.
Yeah, well, it's true. He saw it from 2,500 feet. We see it from the sea level. Nobody's ever seen it from there. Is
it there?
That's a good question. But, it's sort of like the greatest expedition ever done. Yeah, it cost $3.5 million to get there and back. But suppose you do find something. Suppose there is a vent. And suppose that these UFOs that are flying around we see up in the sky, they got to go somewhere. They got to park somewhere. Sometime they got to get out and, use the porta potty. But
maybe they're coming from these vents. George Norrie, along with Brooks Agnu. Brooks, what are the possibility of your trilogy being turned into a TV series?
Oh, actually, it's coming along quite nicely. We have finished a lot of the scripts. The scripts have gone to script contests. We call them table reads or cold reads, where actors pick up the script and read it. We won some Wheat Straw, which is the little awards that you win at these different events. And we finished a trailer and a torch video. Torch video is a 5-minute trailer, which is double the length of a normal trailer. And we have been called by Amazon. So they're interested in buying the film rights. So it's moving along.
Super. Is there going to be another book to the trilogy? Will it be a 4?
It has such a fantastic ending. I just think I'm going to leave it where it is. But I'm writing another. Charm of Favor, of course, was a #1 bestseller several times on Amazon. And so I'm writing a sequel to Charm of Favor. And I'm about halfway through now. I'm on chapter 24.
Brooks, thank you for being on the program. Keep in touch.